Pejeta is mainly engaged in rhino conservation. We have 149 rhinos on Pejeta. We have the largest population of black rhino, 116. We have 3 of the last remaining northern white rhinos. We also conserve a population of about 30 rhinos, of the southern descent. Something interesting to note is that Pejeta is in the southern parts of Laikipia district. Laikipia district is about 10,000 square kilometers. Pejeta lies to the southern bits, and that is important in the sense that, since Mount Kenya is to the east of the Conservancy, the Aberdare ranges to the south western side, it tends to influence the amount of rainfall that we receive compared to the other parts of Laikipia, and further north, Samburu, Lewa sits around about there. That, of course, shapes the densities of wildlife that we have within the Conservancy. One of the highest densities of lions, for example, in Laikipia. And we generally have good vegetation that can support high densities of a variety of game. When you zoom in onto Pejeta, we have a number of land uses that help support conservation work and community development. So the key goal for Pejeta is to conserve wildlife, but at the same time provide an opportunity for the communities that live around us to earn a living. So the model really is to become self-sustaining at some point, generate enough revenues to be able to perpetuate these two objectives in a sustainable manner. And so Pejeta undertakes quite a bit of commercial activities. A housing estate there that leaves sufficient land for also endangered species conservation. It does wheat farming to the south. It has an endangered species enclosure that is also intensively used for cattle production. There's a number of lodges that are dotted across the conservation area. The light shade of green indicates the area that is available for rhino and other species. But then within it, we also integrate cattle ranching business. So those businesses are such that they generate revenue for the purposes of conservation of community, as I said. And so we are not for profit making, but we have institutions within ourselves that are geared towards maximizing profits for continued conservation and community outreach. So we are also not landlocked. We are connected to the rest of Laikipia landscape from the map that I showed you. And so there's a lot of wildlife dispersal in and out. And as such, we support quite a variety of species generally, which, from the large and small, which make up the ecosystem and which we desire to conserve over time. Of course, now as a way of generating revenue, then based on the fact that we have that diversity of wildlife, we rely quite a bit on tourism to generate our income. So 75% of the income comes from tourism. I said that we do mix ranching and wildlife conservation, which means we did not get rid of the Boran breed of cows that we had, but rather we reduced their numbers to minimize any chances of competition. But what is interesting with having cows is that, as you put them into the bomas, that is a mobile predator-proof boma, which is just a series of posts with netting, and so you can quickly move that boma into an area that maybe is degraded in a way, and through defecation and all that, you're able to restore some of these areas, creating a mosaic of, landscape or pasture regeneration, which is actually important in converting wasteland into lands that can be utilized. So, you can use cattle as a way of generating revenue, but at the same time, as a tool for ecological improvement of the range. Then again, also as a risk net, because people will always eat even if they fight. If you have anything that endangers tourism, then you're bound to have your income impacted. But when you diversify, you're better off and sustainable in a way. We have 120 kilometers of a fence line around us, but outside of the fences, we have a number of communities. You're talking about 23,000 people, more than you know, quite a number of households there, I think 4,300 or thereabout. And so it's a community that live around us, and basically we decided that anything that is within about 5 kilometers around the peripheral fence would be considered as a community for the time being. And then we went ahead to map out these communities based on delineations of either physical boundaries, rivers, or whatever. So we have 18 distinct community groups or villages. Each one of those has democratically elected leadership, and that leadership is what the Conservancy uses to engage as a way of communicating to the communities. And so, you know, through such a setup, we're able to engage the communities, whether we are talking of mitigation of human-wildlife conflict, or you're talking of development activities. And you know, some of these development activities are really diverse. We have about 5 key areas. Each one of these photos represents an activity that we undertake. You know, water harvesting, you know, changing the traditional growing of maize to some economic activities there, support of education, energy, health, you know, health extension services, ICT among schools, you know, energy saving vehicles to reduce pollution, cutting down of trees, that and many others. You know, but there's quite a number of diverse activities that are being undertaken within these community areas to safeguard their livelihoods. So, but what is really important is how then can we live harmoniously, as my friend Kinoti said, and how can we get these communities committed to conservation, to ensuring that they pass on this message. You know, that was partly through having to fence. Before the year, I didn't talk about the history of the Conservancy because I vowed to stick to the 15 minutes. But before, we had a poor fencing sort of, fencing is expensive, but in areas where you deem that there will always be very high levels of conflict, sometimes it really works, because then you can put up the appropriate fence, netting amongst communities that are doing, you know, farming, and those that are to the north of us. But, you know, something I mentioned but I didn't really put into perspective is that the rainfall gradient across Pejeta, as you saw it, is so sharp to the point that the northern parts receive less rainfall than the southern, which informs why we did wheat farming in the southern bits. But then it means to the north of us, most communities living there are pastoralists, and so they move around quite a bit and are able to somehow coexist with wildlife. So the corridors or the gaps that I showed you link Pejeta to the rest of Laikipia Samburu ecosystem through those corridors that allow wildlife, majority or all the wildlife, to go through except for the rhino. And so that fence, which is 120 kilometers, is actually also designed in a manner that particular areas have different fence configuration to achieve certain purposes in deterring you know, movement of wildlife. Yeah, and then again also the corridor that I was talking about helps reduce pressure, because what we know is that there's certain species like elephants, if you confine within a small space, they are likely to destroy the habitat there. And then the next thing that will happen is that these animals will begin to, more than ever before, raid community lands, you know, farms and all that. And so you need to allow for the range where possible to breathe and give these animals space to move further on. Then again also, as we know, when these animals get into community areas, some of these farming activities are being undertaken within an acre of land, half an acre, small areas that are either irrigated along the key rivers that either traverse or run along the boundaries. And for example, this photo you're looking at is true indication of what really happens with human-wildlife conflict. That photo was taken a day before and a day after, upon an elephant just crossed the fence into that particular area. And so some of these you know, episodes are quite destructive and can negatively affect the gains that you have made with the communities. And so areas where, for example, communities are extracting water from to irrigate their farms, we have deliberately, as a conservancy, decided, even if the river was the boundary between us and community, we put fence onto the other side and stop animals from extracting water, you know, getting water from the river to sourcing other places. So you minimize cases of contact where possible, and pushing them further on. You know, there has been places where you're talking of actual conflict between predators and communities, and we have had to set up traps into those places and, you know, effectively move those animals out. One of the dangers is that, you know, sometimes like leopards, when you move them, there's a likelihood that they would always come back. So through collaboration with Kenya Wildlife Service, sometimes we move them further away into places where they wouldn't find their way back. This is a translocation exercise that was done in 2013, where following a series of, or following a program, an elaborate program of monitoring problematic elephants within the conservancy. A list of about 10 were identified as the most frequent or notorious fence breakers, and these ones were moved from Pejeta to Lewa. I know that is, to Meru National Park, and observed to see whether that can be a possible solution to human-elephant conflict mitigation. So there's a lot of actually having to move animals about. Then again, even having fences is not good enough. Modifying fences to get, to help prevent certain incursions or certain movement of wildlife is actually what tends to be quite effective. The section you are seeing in red here is a section that was monitored over a long period of time, collecting data on what areas were really problematic with elephants and other species breaking. And for example, that particular area was regarded as a hotspot, and we deployed, like John mentioned in Lewa, we decided to use a short fence, which has been quite effective all through. But then there are other areas where, because a short fence is usually a series of, or a short fence literally before the main fence, which can be quite expensive. And so sometimes you can use our triggers on the main fence in places where you deem that would work well. But the effectiveness of a fence, again, as I said, is as good as the maintenance. If you put a fence there and you don't look after it, it will fail after a while. We've had also, in the recent past, that same fence erected across from Pejeta through cutting across Laikipia. It's called the Great Western Laikipia Fence, done in conjunction with Space for Giants, the county government, and Pejeta. And that is helping address issues of human-elephant conflict, splitting the farming communities from the pastoralist communities to the north. That combined with the use of technology where you've heard of elephants, geofencing issues, that has also been tried. It also was used to show that actually elephants also do learn when you introduce corridors to make use of the wider landscape without necessarily breaking fences. And so that technology also can help you deploy your response teams quite effectively. More to that also, and I had the gentleman who was talking about dealing with primates. We've also had a massive problem with baboons during the harvesting period. And we've discovered also using fence and increasing the earthing, so that the amount of charge delivered to the animal is increased or doubled, tends actually to be quite effective without incurring a lot of cost. And so we've rolled that out on about more than 10 kilometers of fence, and we've tried it for a year now, and there's been no single incursion. So with a bit of learning and adjusting, modifying, you can achieve quite a lot in reducing human-wildlife conflict. But the most important, there's somebody who emphasized, is actually the dialogue, sitting with the communities and addressing these issues based on the issues that they raise. Some of them have, solutions to this problem. And so by actually creating that dialogue, providing an opportunity to discuss with the community on what are the issues affecting them, what are the potential solutions, you find yourself going too far. And again, the other thing is, when you maintain a database over time, you are able to do prediction models of where human-wildlife conflict is bound to occur, and that can help you deploy your response teams much more effectively in the sense that you increase general patrols in areas where you deem that there will be. There is bound to be, conflict. So it's planning resources in line with the data that has been collected over time. And those kind of, a variety of solutions, where you keep changing the fence, where you keep modifying your predator-proof bomber, where you keep records of the mitigation measures you put in place, and using those records to help you predict, to help you create solutions are quite important. That's a team of rangers. One, either just going out in areas where they know there's potential for conflict, particularly primates and baboons and all that, or even just going out to talk to farmers and hear what it is they're facing. In most cases, we've discovered that when there's raids in the community, they tend to do what they can for a while before they let you know. And by the time they let you know, they're demonstrating because they feel like, you've not taken action. But if you can be there gathering information beforehand, you can then have better solutions to these problems. And also providing, like we said, open communication, 24-hour lines that anybody can call at any one given time and report these happenings. Only then can we have, meaningful conservation. And again, also solutions must be tailored to particular species and the problems that these are bound to bring on board. The other thing is the challenges. It's getting drier and drier. It's harder to find water now, and that has increased the interface. As communities move further and further in search for water, as animals also move the same distance in search for water, there is high likelihood of coming into contact, and that is really something that is beginning to happen just north of us. More conflict than before because of resources limitation. Land becoming drier, we are seeing more, high frequency of droughts, which means the resilience of most vegetation, including pastures, is not as great as it were. These lands are not able to support the stocking densities that currently exist, and so there's potential for increased competition as a result of climate change and issues to do with diminishing or overuse of land. And also land tenure and security, places where wildlife would wander freely because they were either corridors, becoming now, settled and having communities mushrooming everywhere, which can also impact on human-wildlife conflict, impact on livelihoods of people. And that requires more effort from not only the private sector, but the government in planning some of these settlements. And so thank you very much. I'm trying to keep within 15 minutes. That is, meant to be. I think that must be Ringo. Ringo was one lovely, small, little, bubbly rhino that used to sit with Sudan. And quite often they would meet, greet, and have a kiss. So thank you. Thank you.
Anybody have any questions?
And sorry, I didn't use this.
Sorry?
Yeah, I didn't get it. Is the whole of Pejeta fenced?
Yes, as a rhino sanctuary, one of the things that is mandatory for a rhino sanctuary is that you need to have a fencing. It's a security mechanism. But Pejeta is not totally fenced. I say there are gaps to the north. Between ourselves and ADC Mutara, which is just to the north of us, is gaps that allow for wildlife movement. And those gaps are designed to allow for species to migrate north. But because rhinos are short, stout, they can go through a series of posts that I showed you. And so they don't also venture because their eyesight is not as good as, and so they see that as a physical barrier. So there is that connectivity. It's not fully fenced. It is semi-fenced, I would say.